Well, my goodness, I find this rather interesting. Now, tell me again how it's everybody else that moves the needle. Tell me again how Paige Bueckers moves the needle. Somebody explain that to me exactly. I would love to know.
Did you notice the startling 71% decline in NCAA Final Four ratings without Caitlin Clark? That means that around 10 million fewer people will watch this year's championship games.
The Final Four ratings, it is something else.
The difference between Clark's draw power and everyone else's is enormous, creating unprecedented buzz across social media and sports networks. What does this mean for women's basketball in sports bars across America? Fans who packed venues for Clark's games were noticeably absent, and Paige Bueckers are really feeling the pressure. Today, we're delving into why these numbers have experts buzzing and what they mean for the future of women's basketball.
UConn's Final Four matchup this year dropped by over 10 million viewers from last year's matchup against Caitlin Clark and the Iowa Hawkeyes. Right there. 14.2 million viewers last year to 4.1 million this year.
Did you notice those figures? Just 4.1 million people watched UConn versus UCLA in this year's Final Four, compared to a whopping 14.2 million for Caitlin Clark versus UConn in Iowa last year. This is a startling 71% decrease in viewership, which has TV execs sleeping at night.
In case you are not paying attention, that's 10.1 million less viewers compared to last year. 10.1 million?
If you're not paying attention, that's 10.1 million fewer viewers than there were when UConn displayed the championship trophy last year. Millions of people chose not to watch without Clark, and this viewership collapse confirms what many of us have been saying all along. Clark is a once-in-a-generation phenomenon who revolutionizes how people interact with women's basketball. Let's be absolutely clear about what we're seeing in these numbers. The mass departure of casual fans who came specifically for Clark and left when she wasn't playing the UConn-UCLA semifinal game should have been a huge draw, with two-story programs fighting for a championship berth. But the viewership plummeted without Clark's star power generating interest. This wasn't a one-time event or a random dip in the ratings.
With, I think it's Serena Williams' husband, she was basically saying, someone said it's literally driven by Caitlin, I bet money on it. And then they talked about potentially making the bet. And I don't think anyone would have thought it would drop this much.
Funny, this is from a thread with, I think this is Serena Williams' husband. She was basically saying someone said it's literally driven by Caitlin, I bet money on it. And then they talked about potentially actually making the bet. And I don't think anyone would have thought it would drop this much. Did you get that? Alexis Ohanian, tech entrepreneur, and Serena Williams' husband called this exact scenario. He boldly predicted that no other player would move the needle like Clark does, and wow, was he right on the money. His bet that Clark's absence would cause a massive viewership drop proved spectacularly accurate. When someone that connected to the sports world makes a prediction like that, and it plays out so perfectly, you have to acknowledge they saw something many others missed. What's particularly telling is that this wasn't isolated to just one game or matchup. Both semifinal games saw this dramatic decline in viewership, which proves this wasn't about specific team matchups or rivalries. This was purely about star power, nor more specifically Caitlin Clark power. The casual fan who got pulled into women's college basketball last year simply didn't show up this time around.
There were less people watching than when Caitlin Clark played the year before. So there is a common denominator. And my favorite thing is like, oh, the only reason Caitlin Clark's popular is because of Angel Reese. Caitlin Clark with it versus Angel Reese. Caitlin Clark without Angel Reese. Double the viewers. Literally double. And then, ironically, Caitlin Clark's Elite 8 had 10 million, then her Final Four. The next game against Caitlin versus Paige had 14 million. Like, anyone saying it because of Angel Reese is like, it is one of the crazy.
Practically speaking, 10 million viewers is more than the entire population of New York City. That would be equivalent to packing every NFL stadium in the nation and still having people left over. The magnitude of this viewership shift shows how unique Clark's influence on the women's game is.
It's almost underestimating the Caitlin Clark mania. Like, Everyone watched that game. Everyone who has ever watched a game of basketball in their life watched that game. It was bigger than the men's final. Everyone who has anything in basketball was watching that game last year. Whereas this year's game was just another game. A good game. Like, UConn were exceptional, but it was just another game.
Everyone who has ever seen a basketball game in their life watched that game, and it was larger than the men's game. So it's almost underestimating the Caitlin Clark craze.
Comment a minute ago, I was addressing this comment right here. So the cult of Caitlin doesn't actually like women's basketball, color me shocked. Or they love transcendent superstars, of which there are no others. Sorry, that's a fact. For a long time,
without Clark, millions of people's interest in women's college basketball was directly tied to watching one particular player. This isn't a criticism of the other amazing talents in the women's game. Rather, it's an acknowledgement of the unparalleled appeal of a transcendent superstar. The raw numbers reveal something that many basketball purists might not want to hear.
I mean, most people don't watch sports unless you give them a reason to tune in. Caitlin Clark gives people a reason.
I was responding to this comment a minute ago. So the cult of Caitlin doesn't really enjoy women's basketball. I'm shocked. Or they love transcendent superstars, of which there are no others. This leads us to a more important question that deserves investigation. Is this huge decline in viewership due to a particular superstar's popularity, or is there another factor at work? This pattern has been observed previously when Magic Johnson and Larry Bird joined the NBA. Something amazing happened overnight, and basketball became a must-watch TV show.
Long time, it was only Magic and Larry. All right, then Michael came along.
We are watching exactly what these superstars did. They made individuals who had never been interested in basketball suddenly tune in religiously. Caitlin Clark.
In mind, there were other real stars of the NBA at that time, but they weren't transcendent in the way that Magic and Larry were.
Basketball history teaches us a very clear truth. Generational talents completely change how millions of casual viewers engage with the sport. Magic and Bird became the reason that millions of new viewers first learned about basketball. Their games drew in people who had no interest before, illuminating courts like beacons. This pattern has repeated with only a few players throughout the years. History of basketball.
For a long time, it was only Magic and Larry. All right, then Michael came along. Now keep in mind, there were other real stars of the NBA at that time, but they weren't transcendent in the way that Magic and Larry were. And those were the two stars that basketball fans tuned in for. And then Jordan came along. What am I going to say? I've said, hybrid love child of Larry Bird and Steph Curry with the branding of Jordan. We are here. Sorry, LeBron, but we are now witness. Not to you. Paige doesn't have that aura in the end that Clark has. Not even close.
Then arrived when Michael Jordan first appeared on the scene, the NBA saw an unprecedented surge in popularity. According to one basketball historian, he was like a hybrid love child of Larry Bird and Steph Curry, and his branding, aerial artistry, and competitive fire changed everything about how basketball connected with mainstream culture. Now, compare this to Caitlin Clark and women's college basketball. The pattern is the same. She's that rare athlete who makes people who have never watched women's basketball think, I need to see what this Clark person is doing. Her logo range three-pointers evoke Curry's gravity-dang shooting, while her no-look passes channel Magic's court wizardry. The huge viewership numbers come from millions of casual viewers who wouldn't normally watch.
Everyone can't be Caitlin Clark generational, but Paige is, quote, a good player. Of course, there's the needle moving right there.
This fact is revealed by contrasting Caitlin Clark with other celebrities. Insiders refer to the Paige Bueckers versus Caitlin Clark needle movement as a swift death. This doesn't belittle Paige, who is an amazing person in her own right. Clark's unique ability to attract others who might not otherwise be interested in the sport is something that cannot be produced.
And then, I stand by this, LSU Iowa Part 2 is the most important women's basketball game ever, because everyone showed up. Everyone that was meant to show up showed up. There were more people watching that game than watching the first one. More people watched the rematch, and the rematch was mental. The stuff like Caitlin Clark did some things to Hailey Van Lith that may have broken the violated the Geneva Convention.
Although Paige is a good player, it can't be Caitlin Clark's generation. The uncomfortable truth is that the needle is moving right there. According to one sports media expert, casual followers are essential to the growth of any sport. Hardcore supporters will always watch, but they are insufficient to propel significant growth. Critics claim that Clark's popularity is driven by favoritism or demographics, but the data paints a more convincing picture. Clark's influence is significant because she is attracting the kind of new audience that women's basketball needs to grow. Her remarkable shooting range, court vision, and highlight reel passes produce moments that go beyond the realm of basketball.
If you were a fan of, if you just wanted to see one team play spectacularly, UConn are that. South Carolina were terrible. They were absolutely terrible. But UConn at least played spectacularly. But if we look at the previous finals, like the LSU-Iowa game was crazy. Like that was mad. Before all this type of stuff, it was a mad game. Like, I blanked on your one's name coming off the bench and just nailing every shot she took.
And I firmly believe that LSU-Iowa Part 2 is the most significant women's basketball game ever, because everyone who was supposed to attend showed up, and more people watched the rematch than the first one. The rematch was incredible. It seemed like Caitlin Clark did something to Hailey Van Lith that might have violated the Geneva Convention. This phenomenon explains why viewership drops when a star leaves. It happened with Jordan, and we're witnessing it again. Most people need a compelling reason to watch, and Clark provides that reason, which shows the universal power of a once-in-a-generation talent to draw viewers who otherwise wouldn't.
Yeah, NCAA is... Women's basketball is significantly less attractive to viewers at this point in time without Caitlin Clark. But you can also say it's in a much better position than it was BC. So we've got AC and we've got BC. We've got before Caitlin and after Caitlin. The AC is in a much better position than BC.
That significant decline without Clark only partially explains the situation, since prior to Caitlin Clark ever setting foot on an NCAA floor, women's basketball was a very different sport. Fighting for television slots and barely making an impression on social media back then, women's college basketball wasn't exactly something that the average sports fan would watch. Most casual viewers couldn't name more than one or two players, if any at all. What's really amazing is that, despite that massive 71% viewership crash, we recently witnessed women's basketball stands at levels that would have seemed impossible in the pre-Clark era. The entire definition of success has been completely rewritten, and the standards for good numbers in women's basketball have permanently shifted upward.
And I do think that a lot of these female players, they've done a really good job of keeping people that have tuned in to watch staying there, because yes, the intrigue to go there was from Caitlin, and while yes, as a percentage, there's a big percentage that are just there for Caitlin. When you look at it as numbers, and especially compared to how it was before, it's in a really good place.
Indeed. Without Caitlin Clark, NCAA women's basketball is currently much less appealing to viewers, but you could also argue that it's in a much better position than it was BC. As a result, we have AC and BC. We have BC before Caitlin, and after Caitlin, the AC is in a much better position than BC. People who had never watched women's basketball before suddenly became interested in it after last year's LSU-Iowa championship game. One Chicago sports bar owner said he had to turn away patrons who had come specifically to watch the final, which was something he had never seen for women's college basketball before. These new viewers were drawn into the whole competitive drama, and many of them stayed, which is an example of the rising tide effect, much like how NBA legends attracted millions of new basketball fans who stayed for decades. The amazing thing is that a sizable percentage of viewers who learned about women's basketball from Clark have grown to be true fans of the sport. Clark established a new standard of interest in women's basketball.
When you look at it as a percentage, it's extremely small. The percentage of people that are just watching for Caitlin that stay for the other players, it is a small percent. As you can see, the percentage drop here, but the people gain But you also take into account the people gain from here to.
And I do think that a lot of these female players, they've done a really good job of keeping people that have tuned in to watch staying there. Because yeah, the intrigue to go there was from Caitlyn. And while yes, as a percentage, there's a big percentage that are just there for Caitlyn when you look at it as numbers. And especially compared to how it was before, it's in a really good place. The evidence appears across every metric that matters this year's tournament. Even without Clark pulled in viewership numbers that would have made headlines just a few years ago, media coverage expanded dramatically, social media engagement for women's basketball exploded, merchandise sales skyrocketed. These represent a fundamental shift in how the sport is perceived and consumed. What began as I'm watching to see Clark for millions evolved into I'm watching because I enjoy women's basketball. Fans who tuned in for Clark's no-look passes stayed and discovered other compelling stars like Angel Reese with her dominant rebounding or Guji Watkins with her scoring prowess. New storylines and rivalries emerged that captured people's attention when.
So all in all, you can tell it's in a really good position, but you can also shut up the argument that, you know, the game's still, that Caitlyn isn't just bigger than the game. Caitlyn is the rising tide that lifts all boats. The amount of fans she brought in is undeniable.
This phenomenon rarely happens in sports. Most stars increase ratings during their careers, but few radically change their sports popularity baseline. Clark's accomplishment went beyond simply attracting attention for a short time. She paved the way for fans to form real connections with the sport. Yes, many casual viewers left when she did, but the base level of interest remained significantly higher than before her arrival. The sport moved from a small venue to a major arena, and even though some seats were empty, they're still playing to a much bigger crowd than before. By renovating the entire entrance to make it more aesthetically pleasing and accessible, Clark permanently raised the profile of women's basketball in the sports environment.